This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Need a mic. I think I can hear myself now. Well, good afternoon. For those of you who are coming back for a second week, welcome and thank you. And then for those of you who are new to our group this week, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Linnell Cadre, and I am the Vice Provost for Equity and Inclusion here at Emory University. And welcome back to our second Trump Talk Dialogue series, First 100 Days. Today we will be talking about immigration and economics. A couple of announcements up front. First of all, I would like to welcome the editor from The Wheel, who is here today joining us right here in the front of the room. And I'm not sure if anyone is here from the Emory Report. If you are, would you identify yourself? I would also like to thank the Faculty, Staff, and Assistance Program. Today, Susan Matthews is here joining us. If there is a need for you to have a conversation, a private conversation with someone, Susan is right here in the center of the room. Feel free to tap her on the shoulders and she'll take you outside. Also, we have today, we are taping our presentations. We're not taping the dialogue. So feel free to have open discussion and lively discussion. I hope you will. And as I mentioned last week, please make sure that you keep them as respectful as you possibly can. These are really complex issues, and we really want you to discuss them, but we want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to ask their questions as well. So today we have two guest speakers with us. Polly Price, who is the Professor of Law and Professor of Global Health at Emory University. She teaches and writes about citizenship, immigration, and public health law. She is an honors graduate of Harvard Law School. Professor Price clerked for Judge Richard S. Arnold of the 8th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. Following her clerkship, she practiced law for several years at King & Spalding in Atlanta and in Washington, D.C. She is the author of 2 books and numerous articles on American legal history, citizenship, immigration, and the judiciary. Her most recent book, Judge Richard S. Arnold, A Legacy of Justice on the Federal Bench, includes a foreword by Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and a front cover blurb by former President Bill Clinton. Paul Rubin is the Samuel Candler Dobbs Professor of Economics at Emory University, past president of the Southern Economic Association, and former editor of Managerial and Decisions Economics. He is associated with the Technology Policy Institute, the American Enterprise Institute, and the Independent Institute. Professor Rubin has been a senior economist at President Reagan's Council of Economic Advisors and has held senior positions on the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission and the Federal Trade Commission. He has taught economics at Emory, the University of Georgia, City University of New York, BPI, and George Washington University Law School. He has written or edited 11 books and published over 250 articles and chapters on economics, law, regulation, and evolution in professional journals, and he frequently contributes to the Wall Street Journal. Professor Rubin's work has been cited in the professional literature over 10,000 times. He has addressed numerous business, professional, policy, government, and academic audiences, and frequently consults on the economics of legal issues. Please join me in welcoming our speakers today.
Thank you all for being here. Since I teach immigration law, I want to sort of say up front, this is an enormously broad topic. And I'm going to separate my remarks here into 2 parts, keep them fairly brief, because I expect most of your specific questions we would need to address during the discussion. But here's the 2 parts I want to divide it into: external and internal. And I'm going to start with the external, and that is, who is the United States allowing into the country from outside? So this is the issue of the travel ban. This is the issue of refugees. When I turn to the internal perspective, we're looking at who is the United States seeking to deport. Okay, so I'm going to make that basic division. There are a lot of other things we could talk about, but I want to just begin with that. So let's start with the external. There was lots of press about the travel ban and the Syrian refugee situation. There still continues to be. As you know, the Trump administration's second attempt at a travel ban is on hold because of injunctions issued by 2 federal courts. The basis of the litigation has to do with, first of all, the no showing of a necessity for singling out those 7 countries, and that's a showing that's probably required under the INA. And then more, has been better covered in the press, it's perceived as a Muslim ban, and also because, at least originally, it had an exception for refugees who were religious minorities in those countries, that favoring Christians. That part has been removed, but both of the federal courts that have issued injunctions look back to the campaign rhetoric, which was very clear about what the intent of the administration was going to be. So there's a lot that's unresolved there, and I don't think we can really say that much more about it, or at least at this point. I'm happy to talk about it more with under discussion. One of the questions, though, that I think we all would like to know about is how does this affect persons who are already within the United States who entered from one of these countries with a student or an employment visa? And the executive order says no new immigration benefits can proceed during the moratorium. And what that basically means is if you tried to change your status, extend your visa, anything along those lines, the moratorium, the executive branch moratorium says that USCIS cannot process that for you during the moratorium. So it's unclear really. I mean, it sounds like, and I don't mean to make predictions, but it sounds like at least that part of the executive order would survive litigation, at least for now, because the State Department, as a general rule, the Secretary of State can direct embassies abroad not to issue visas, and they seem to have done this. So with the moratorium in place, it means specifically that no visas being issued overseas from those particular countries, and then also that students who are already here will not have their visas extended. They won't be revoked, but they wouldn't be extended. You wouldn't be able to turn those, student visa into a researcher visa. But again, I'm not, I don't practice immigration law. We have people available that the International Student Services Office can give advice if any of you find yourself in that situation. Okay, now refugees, this is a different story. Okay, so remember that there was a travel ban on people coming in from the country, but there's also a specific order about refugees. And this is, it limits the number of refugees that can come in. It had what looked like a temporary ban on all refugees and a permanent ban on Syrian refugees. Now it seems to be just a temporary ban on all refugees. And this is a different story because it's probably something the courts can't help much with. It's up to Congress to overrule the Trump administration on this issue if they wish to do so. Otherwise, the president has a lot of authority here. The 1980 Refugee Act gives the president power to determine the number of refugees who may be admitted in any fiscal year, and the Trump administration has already said it tends to reduce those numbers significantly than those that were admitted under the Obama administration. Now, we've actually seen this before after 9/11, there was a freeze on refugee admissions. It sounds very similar to what the Trump administration is asking for now. It was a freeze put into effect. That was a period of 2 months, not 6 months or more. It was 2 months while a comprehensive review of procedures was undertaken. And so the idea was to make the program safer and stronger, and the freeze gave them an opportunity to take another look at that. So there is far stronger vetting today. A lot has been made of President Trump's call for extreme vetting of persons from certain countries, extreme vetting of refugees. And I just want to point out that since 9/11 and even more recently, there's already some very stringent vetting that goes on to which refugees and special immigrant visa status applicants are subjected. They're fairly rigorous procedures. They lead to a waiting time of nearly 2 years before the refugees can be admitted into the United States. So it's about 18 to 24 months for Iraqi and Syrian refugees that that protocol remains in place, is now being reviewed, presumably, but it had continually been reviewed by interagency officials up to now. So in any event, just some background on refugee screening and what may be going on there. But one of the reasons that it takes nearly 2 years, this wait, they're in camps, by the way, for 2 years, so it's not a terribly effective strategy to come to the United States and commit terrorism. I mean, you've got to live in a camp for 2 years. But nonetheless, this is the screening that was already taking place for them. FBI, Department of Homeland Security, State Department, national intelligence agencies together check the refugees' biometric data against security databases. Of course, the big problem is that a lot of these people won't be in any kind of security database, given their situation. But so that's. So I want to turn then from the external, the letting people in from outside the United States, to, I hate to put it this way, but it's who do we throw out? I mean, that's kind of where a lot of the rhetoric is these days. So I want to focus on immigration enforcement within the United States. There are big changes here. There were 2 executive orders that came out at about the same time as the travel ban. And they didn't get nearly as much attention as the travel ban, but they made some big changes, and there's less press describing what those changes actually entail. So I wanted to give you sort of an overview of what the biggest changes are under the Trump administration since coming into office. So the biggest change is the expansion of ICE enforcement priorities to basically no limits. Any unauthorized immigrant is subject to arrest and deportation. All right, that's always been true in the United States because that's what congressional laws state. So the Trump administration is not making stuff up here. What it's doing is rolling back what had been under both President Obama and then also under President Bush prior to President Obama, priority memos. The priority memos would set out, these are our priorities for enforcement. And they included gang members, persons who committed serious crimes, recent entrants, in other words, people who've just come here recently, that those were the priorities for ICE. Now, why did ICE need to make priorities? Well, because under President Obama, the deportations were about 400,000 per year. And many people look at that number and say, that's the maximum we can do under the current structure. If we don't get more immigration judges, if we don't get more enforcement agencies, if we don't have more detention facilities. But the primary holdup is in the immigration courts. And I'll say a little bit more about the immigration courts later. But there's also, so basically the Trump administration said, no, everybody's a priority. So that, and ICE's reaction to that was, or at least a spokesman said, this is great, we can finally do our jobs again. And you may remember that a group of ICE employees sued President Obama about the DACA policy. And so that's their thinking, is that the priorities that they had to abide by were keeping them from doing their jobs. It just makes me wonder who they work for. So, all right, another big change, and this is something that Congress has permitted, but the Department of Homeland Security has never exercised to its full authority. So that's something called expedited removal, and this is a law that was passed about 2 decades ago. It allows the government to quickly deport undocumented immigrants who have not been in the United States very long without allowing them to go before a judge, or not requiring them, allowing them to go. So in practice, this is the process known as expedited removal. It's been used very narrowly because of concerns about whether it violates constitutional rights of due process that are granted to anyone in the United States, regardless of immigration status. So while it is authorized by Congress, and here's basically how it works, is that if you're picked up for an immigration violation anywhere in the United States, and you can't prove that you've been here longer than 2 years, you can be deported expeditiously. In other words, you don't get a chance to go to the before an immigration court to plead your case. Now, since 2002, the practice had been, up until the new executive order and the accompanying memo, it had been only applied to immigrants who had been in the country less than 2 weeks and were caught within 100 miles of the border. Okay, so that's very recent arrivals that you have good reason to suspect are in the country illegally because of where they are found, if they have no papers, where they are found, and very recent arrival. And even that has caused some significant problems in terms of someone is picked up, put into expedited removal. They don't have a chance to get an attorney. One is not provided for you. If you can find a volunteer attorney, or if you can pay one, then you would have representation. But there have been a number of, I guess, what we would consider erroneous or mistaken deportations, including 1 or 2 U.S. citizens in recent years, because when you're incarcerated, it's very difficult to find your papers. And this system moves very quickly. So some of the advice I've heard given is that anyone who is not a citizen should carry proof of your status. And if you don't have an authorized status, at least carry proof you've been here longer than 2 years. Now, if you ask me what that proof would be, I don't know. But just, be thinking about what that could possibly mean. So you can see why there are due process problems about this, because someone, had lived here for 2 years, can be caught up in the system where, just has been less than 2 years, is entitled to be put into expedited removal while someone else might not be, and that's the basic controversy there. So the idea, though, it seems to be that to meet this problem of not enough capacity in federal immigration judges is to expand this other expedited process where you bypass the judges altogether. So that still will not solve the capacity problem. Right now, there are about 500,000 cases in the backlog in immigration courts. There are over 100 vacancies. The executive order calls for thousands of new Customs and Border Protection and ICE, but says nothing about immigration judges. If you have all of these people, if you add even more to that number, they're already waiting 4 or 5 years. And the idea is the pushing forward of incarceration, detention, immigration detention, until you're able to see a judge. So if you think about the number of years you might be in immigration detention before you can even make your case, and the capacity there is already beyond what the federal system can handle. And there have been numerous instances of adverse health care effects on people in overcrowded situations in the federal prisons. So as part of the executive order now, President Trump is authorizing the Department of Homeland Security to enter into additional agreements with state and local jails to hold these people. And in order to entice more state and local jails to participate in the program, they are authorizing contracts to be signed without the list of federal protections that used to be there before, that the state and local governments had to agree to. Okay, so in any event, I think the expedited removal is really one of the big changes that we haven't heard much about, and there are a lot of implications. We may see some litigation over that. And then also the not having the priorities anymore, meaning that ICE can pick you up if you have a traffic violation. Okay, so, or you can end up in ICE custody based on a traffic violation. So, so that's a big worry of, in terms of the immigrant community generally, and also, you know, the concern about splitting up families and so forth, that these new policies don't take that into account in a way that immigration reform advocates might wish to see. And then finally, I will stop with this. The chances for immigration reform, what are we going to see? It would be nice if the Republicans could agree on the bipartisan immigration reform bill that was presented in 2012. It's bipartisan, passed in the Senate, got to the House. You may remember this. And the House said, no, we're not going to vote on the whole bill. We're going to wait till the border is secure. And when the border is secure, then we'll take it up. So we'll see. You know, now there's a Republican president, Republican both houses in Congress. Broad support on both sides of the aisle in the Senate for this. It included a path to citizenship. It included essentially a DREAM Act. So that's, we'll see. So I'm going to stop here and turn it over to Paul.
Thank you. So I'm talking about economics, which is what I do. And I think the basic starting point is that the economy under Trump has, in the first however many days, has not been doing badly, has been doing fairly well. From the election till now, the stock market is up about 10%. From Trump's taking over till now, it's up about 3%. Unemployment is down from 4.7 to 4.5%. Unemployment is not a great number because people can withdraw from the labor force if they're discouraged, and so unemployment numbers are not a perfect measure, but labor force participation rates are up to 63%. They've been higher in the past, but 63% is the highest it's been pretty much in the last 5 or 6 years. And so the unemployment rate is really a fairly decent measure of what's happening in the labor market. Wages are up a bit also. So at least in those measures, the economy seems to be doing fairly well. Why? Well, there's lots of things going on, but I think a lot of the real action, the real economic action that's happening in the Trump administration is not what's in the news. What's in the news are things like immigration and Korea and whether the Russians were wiretapping Hillary or whoever was supposed to be wiretapping who. I haven't quite been able to get my head around that. Those are the things in the news, but I think where the economic action has been in the area of regulation. And Trump has signed several executive orders. More importantly, he has, or at least as importantly, he hasn't made very many appointments yet, not enough, but the people that he's appointed to regulatory positions and also to the cabinet have also been deregulators. The big one so far has been the EPA has, for example, the two tunnels are being constructed now. There's much less regulation of coal, although that may not have very much difference. But there's, deregulation is happening actually fairly broadly. I was in the, as I now mentioned, I was in the Reagan administration at the beginning, and I actually think Trump is deregulating faster and more broadly than Reagan did in the first 3 years of his administration. And yet, if you remember, that the economy did quite well then, and I think the deregulation that's going on now is doing better. Labor Department is less regulatory. The big ones are yet to come. Of course, the big one is health care, and if we could get something passed that would make sense, the CBO estimates that Obamacare is reducing labor force participation by about 2%. So if we could do something to make it into a sensible plan, we could see more employment simply from that. So that's one of the big ones. The other big thing is, of course, tax reform. If we could see some serious redoing of taxes, for example, enabling countries to bring money back to the U.S. that's now held overseas and that they won't bring back because of taxes. If we could make some sense out of that, we could see further growth. And those are things that President Trump is talking about. So a lot of what's going on, as I say, is really flying under the radar, but it is really really big. Now, what are the kinds of things that are happening? Well, this morning just happened to be an editorial in the Wall Street Journal that I thought, since I was going to speak here, I thought was relevant just to illustrate the kinds of regulations we're talking about. We're not talking about basic, fundamental clean air, clean water regulations. Here's one called the FDA's Pizza Minders. And as part of Obamacare, pizza manufacturers, pizza sellers who have over 20 stores are required to post calorie content of each slice of pizza. What does that mean? Well, Domino's offers 3.4 million potential combinations of pizza. So what does it mean to have the calorie count of each of 3.4 million slices of pizza? Obviously, it doesn't mean anything. It's not a thing that could be in any sense useful. The law also requires the size of the type and the color of the type. A hugely bureaucratic rule. I don't think anyone thinks pizza is a low-calorie health food, right? Nonetheless, we have this huge set of regulations for pizza, and that's just one example. But the amount of deregulation that's going on in economic deregulation is, I think, quite remarkable, and I think it's going to. It's interesting. Politically, it's hard to talk about deregulation. As soon as you say, well, we're cutting back on the Clean Air Act, people say, you want to pollute the air, you want things to be dirty. The best estimate of, say, the EPA that economists have come up with is that overall the EPA has been a good thing. If you look at the total benefit of the EPA compared with the total cost of the EPA, benefits are greater than costs, so the regulation has been useful. But it's also true that if you look on the margin at new regulations, generally speaking, the costs are greater than the benefits. So while overall it's been good, but it's basically the bureaucrats have pushed it too far, have pushed the regulation too far, and that's true of many, many regulations. They've simply been pushed, I say the pizza regulation, they've simply been pushed too far, and there's a real gain to the economy, a gain in growth, a gain in real incomes from cutting back on some of those regulations. So those things have been the positive impacts, in my view, the positive impacts of Trump on the economy. There have been some negative things too. I talked about immigration, but one of the big things seems to be the reduction in immigration from Mexico. Mexicans are not coming over in the numbers they were. This has actually serious impacts on the agricultural sector, has serious impacts on construction. If you ever go to a construction site and speak English, very few people will know what you're talking about. Construction has been very much a Latino and Mexican market here, and yet Mexicans are not coming. So those two markets are being hurt by the immigration restrictions, and I think that wasn't the focus of Polly's talk, but I think that is an important thing to think about. And the other thing, of course, is foreign trade. Most economists think that allowing trade is a useful thing. Trump hasn't done as much as he talked about with respect to trade, but he's done some things and he may do more. It's hard to know because there's apparently, just from the press, infighting within the administration, and some of the people that are more in favor of increased regulation seem to be losing a little power there, and people with a little more economic sense seem to be gaining. He hadn't appointed until recently. I think he's appointed, or at least named, Kevin Hassett from the American Enterprise Institute to be the head of the Council of Economic Advisors, which is although it's been demoted, but it's a very important, I worked for it, so I'm unprejudiced, but it's a very important voice in the economy. Even in the Reagan years, my boss, Murray Wiedenbaum, was called the lobbyist for Japan. He was the only person in the administration who would talk about free trade and the benefits of free trade. And if we don't have that voice, then we lose something. But I say now there is an economist appointed. At least he's in the process of being appointed. And I think he will, to the extent that he gets listened to, will be able to do some good. But the other people, Cohen and the children, Ivanka and her husband, seem to be reasonably sensible people and seem to be moving away from some of the more extreme positions and moving us more towards centrist stuff. But I say, in my view, the big thing is, we have to do something with healthcare, but we've done something with the environment, and and deregulation in general. Those are the big things, and banking is the other big one. Right now we still have Cordray running the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. That's a legal mess right now. He's apparently, one court has said that they can fire him, one court has said they can't, and we're waiting for an appellate decision, I believe, on that. And if we could put someone who's more business friendly, although I don't like to use that term really, because I think when someone is business friendly, they also benefit consumers. Someone who is more market friendly in that office, I think we could get banks making more loans, and we could free up a lot of cash again. So in my view, the big player is regulation and deregulation, and that seems to be going on at a reasonably rapid clip. Thank you.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.